They said I wasn't on the list. It was a sharp, indifferent sentence. Not angry, not cruel, just administrative. Like I was a misplaced item on a guest roster. Like I didn't exist in their version of the day. The hotel concierge wouldn't even meet my eyes. She tapped the screen again, tilting it toward me with apologetic fingers. I'm sorry, ma'am. The Monroe wedding is a private event. You're not on the guest list. Not Captain Monroe. Not ma'am the way the junior officers say it, straight-backed and tight-voiced. Just someone with no name, no clearance, no invitation. My sister's name was everywhere. On the signage, in the bouquet cards, on the custom-printed menus I caught glimpses of when another guest walked past the velvet rope. Rebecca and Daniel. Script font. Champagne gold ink. Monroe had always sounded better next to hers. Hadn't it? I stood there for a long minute, not speaking, not pushing. My dress uniform blazer was in the car. I had worn civilian black to be invisible, to be quiet, to try, one last time, to be only a sister, not a symbol. I didn't want to show up as the officer. I wanted to show up as family, but I wasn't family anymore. Was I? Have you ever stood at the gates of your own blood celebration and realized they had erased you completely on purpose? My shoes crunched the gravel as I turned back toward the parking lot. A little boy was chasing a bubble wand across the lawn, some cousin I didn't know. A woman I barely recognized from childhood glanced up, eyes scanning me with faint confusion. You know that look, don't you? When someone is trying to place you, but can't. Or won't. I walked slowly to my car. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't break. I opened the back door and took the uniform from its hanger, folded with precision. Insignia brushed. Medals aligned. The weight of it in my hands was like memory itself. Do you know what it's like to carry a uniform that's heavier than grief? Inside the soft interior of my vehicle. I slid into the jacket and fastened the buttons one by one. Each click was a quiet defiance. A silence made solid. They hadn't invited me as their sister. So I would attend as the woman I truly was. The officer who held clearance beyond their comprehension. The analyst who signed off on night missions no civilian would ever read about. The ghost they never bothered to understand. The parking valet blinked when I stepped out. His eyes went from my braid to the ribbons on my chest, and then to my boots, polished, steady. He didn't ask for my name. He just stepped back and said, "Ma'am." I walked across the lawn alone. The ceremony was already beginning, a string quartet playing something light and ridiculous near the gazebo. Rows of chairs, lace fans, a sea of cousins and aunts in floral prints. My mother's profile caught in sunlight, her posture pristine, her gloved hands clutching a program. I stood to the side. No one saw me at first, not until Rebecca's voice rang out over the crowd. "I just want to thank everyone who matters," she said into the mic, beaming. "All the people who've supported me since the beginning, who've never judged me, never tried to be more important, never chased some masculine dream of control." There was a pause. Her eyes slid sideways and landed on me. I saw the flicker, the twitch of a smile that wasn't a smile. And then she said it. Unlike some people who couldn't even make time for my engagement dinner, because apparently war games are more important than family. Laughter, light, shocked, half confused, the kind of cruelty that slides under the skin. She turned back to the groom. "Daniel, you made me feel seen. Unlike others who always had to wear rank like armor, my hands didn't move. My shoulders didn't tense. I just looked at her. I don't know what you would have done. Standing there. Would you have stormed out? Confronted her shrunk. But I'm trained for silence. Silence in jungles. Silence in embassy corridors. Silence behind steel. I waited. The officiant tried to regain control of the ceremony. I watched as my father glanced toward me and quickly looked away. I stood under the shade of the oak tree at the back, uninvited, unacknowledged, unmoved, until the vows were over, until the kiss, until the applause. And then something strange happened. The groom Daniel stepped down from the platform, hand still entwined with my sister's, and instead of walking down the aisle, he turned. He walked straight toward me. Rebecca's expression faltered. Whispers started. Daniel stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. He let go of her hand. He looked me dead in the eye, lips parting like he was about to speak. And then he did something no one else in that family ever had. He saluted. A full, proper, flawless salute. Not the stiff, awkward kind from a man trying to impress. A real one, clean, sharp, earned. The crowd fell quiet. He held it, and I returned it. My fingers rose, precisely, slowly, like the unfolding of something sacred, a truth that could not be denied. He dropped his hand. "Captain Monroe," he said, voice low. "It's an honor." Rebecca's face turned to stone. The applause didn't resume. No one knew what to do. My mother's fan stopped mid-flutter, and I didn't move. I didn't thank him. I didn't smirk. I just stood there and let the silence crack the ceremony open like glass. You ever notice how silence can say everything they're afraid to hear? That was the moment it changed. Not because of the salute, but because for once they all saw me. Not the daughter who wasn't on the list. Not the sister who missed birthdays. Not the failure they whispered about behind white wine and hors d'oeuvres. They saw the woman who walked through fire and never needed their approval to survive. Rebecca's bouquet slipped a little in her hand. You could see it, how her fingers clenched tighter, how the petals trembled from the strain. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Not after Daniel's salute. Not after the unspoken shift in the air that even the caterers and photographers could feel. There's a sound that doesn't make a sound when a family realizes they don't know you anymore. It ripples. It rewrites the room. He called me Captain Monroe, not Elise, not Becca's older sister, not the moody one. Just my rank. Just the truth. I didn't walk forward. I didn't join the procession. I didn't reclaim a seat that was never offered. I simply turned and walked parallel to the aisle, along the edge of the lawn where hydrangeas bloomed, past the guests craning their necks and the cousins whispering in disbelief. I could feel my mother's stare piercing the back of my uniform, could almost hear her voice in my head. "What are you trying to prove?" But I wasn't trying. I was existing. You know that ache when you realize your survival is seen as defiance. The valet opened the car door without a word. His hands trembled slightly. I slid inside, the fabric of my uniform whispering against leather, and as I drove down the long, tree-lined exit, I saw my father on the veranda. He was watching, frozen. His hand still held the champagne glass, unraised, uncelebrated. That night, I didn't take off my uniform. I let it stay wrapped around me like skin. I lay down with it. I let the metals rest against my chest and wondered how many years it took to build a silence thick enough to choke you. Do you know what it's like to be the daughter they only speak of in past tense? At 13, I wanted to be a pilot. My father said girls with crooked teeth and strong opinions didn't belong in cockpits. I memorized every aircraft model in secret, repeating specs under my breath while washing dishes, while walking to school. My sister got a tiara on her 15th birthday. I got a lecture about how eyeliner made girls look desperate. At 17, I skipped prom for the ASVAB. At 19, I joined a unit where I was the only woman in a 50-man briefing room. At 24, I was offered a clearance level my own senator uncle couldn't dream of. But at Rebecca's engagement dinner, I was still the cold one, the one who never really came home, because I didn't know how to come home to people who never built a door. Years blurred, dusty forward operating bases, satellite feeds crackling with static and heat. Night operations where breath froze in my mask, names redacted, locations erased. But always the silence from back home, not absence. Worse, indifference. Once, I sent a message to my father from a conflict zone, a line of code in an encrypted email, just to say I was alive. He replied, "Try not to miss your sister's birthday this year." No mention of the mission, no curiosity. Just guilt disguised as etiquette. Sometimes, I imagined exploding into the family party mid-toast, medals glinting, drone footage playing behind me, proof of the woman I'd become. But that's not how power works. Not real power. Real power doesn't need a witness. Real power is walking away while they watch. And they will watch. 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a letter. Real paper. Embossed. Not from Rebecca. Not from anyone with my blood. It was from the Deputy Secretary of Defense. A quiet commendation. For operational integrity, critical asset protection, and unshakable moral clarity under pressure. It didn't name the location, or the lives I'd saved. But it said enough. There was one sentence that stuck with me. Leadership is clearest when you stand alone. I read it twice. And then I put it in a drawer with the others. The letters, the ribbons, the recognition they'll never understand. Do you know what it's like to have 1,000 strangers know your worth? But your own mother can't remember your birthday without a reminder. Sometimes I think about the day I was left off that list. Not in anger. Not anymore. Now, I think of it as a turning. The kind of betrayal so deliberate it sets you free. It unhooks you from expectation. It wipes the mirror clean. And suddenly, you're not trying to be good enough for them anymore. You're simply you at headquarters. A younger recruit stopped me in the elevator the next week. A woman bright-eyed, sharp voice, nervous energy. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying you wore that uniform at a wedding, I saw the photo online. It was bold." I smiled. Just a little. Not bold. I told her. Necessary. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she was someone else's forgotten daughter too. At family reunions now, they send the group photos to me after the fact. There's always a caption like, "Wish you'd been there? Hope you're doing something exciting." Again, that's the thing about erasure. Once they try it and fail, they don't know how to rewrite you. Rebecca didn't speak to me for months, until her name landed on a temporary clearance list I was reviewing. She was applying for a nonprofit partnership with the Department of Defense, PR campaigns, civ mil engagement, optics. Mostly. I saw her name. I highlighted it. Then I clicked forward. To the proper department. Without comment. I didn't interfere. I didn't block her. I didn't remind her of that day on the lawn, or the smirk she gave me across the crowd. Because that's not what power looks like either. Power is letting her wonder. Wonder whether I said something. Wonder whether I watched her application rise or fall. Wonder whether I still remembered her voice that day. I did. But I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her approval. Because the moment Daniel turned and saluted me, the old hierarchy shattered. The sister she mocked had become the standard everyone else would now be measured against. And none of them, not even she, would ever be able to look at me the same again. A month later, I got a call from my mother. I almost didn't answer. Not out of spite. Just habit. Her number had become something like static to me, the kind of call that only brought shallow pleasantries or veiled questions about when I'd settle down or come home. But something in me paused. I pressed accept. "Elise," she said. That same brittle tone. Your uncle saw your name in the service journal. Something about a commendation. No hello. No how are you. Just that same discomfort. Like pride mixed with confusion. Yes, I said. It's classified. But yes, I received it. Silence. Then, well, your father thought maybe you'd want to come to the fall gathering. Everyone will be there. Even Rebecca. You two haven't... We have... I interrupted. We've seen each other recently. Another pause. I could hear her swallow. Then, quieter. That wasn't a good day. No apology, just those careful civilian words. Not a good day. I looked out the window of my office glass walls, the DC skyline humming with secrets and motion. I thought about how many meetings I'd chaired this week, how many male voices had deferred to mine without a second thought. And yet my mother still didn't know how to say I was wrong about you. Tell Dad I'm doing well, I said. I have to go. I hung up. You ever wonder how many times you've stayed on a call just to play a role you never agreed to? I don't anymore. 2 days after that call, I was sent on a diplomatic escort. Nothing flashy, just classified enough to require me, a secure transition of intel from NATO partners. But while boarding the plane, one of the attachés stopped me. You're Captain Monroe. Right, he said. I nodded. My cousin married Daniel. From the Monroe wedding. I raised an eyebrow. He smiled hesitant. Almost embarrassed. He told the whole story. Said he didn't know who you were until the night before. Read your file. Said he felt ashamed not to have known. I said nothing. Anyway, the attaché added, I just wanted to say, it meant a lot. What you did. Showing up, staying calm, not lashing out. I looked at him, then past him, toward the runway stretching out like a quiet dare. It wasn't about staying calm, I said. It was about being seen. You understand that, don't you? It's not about attention. It's about existence. It's about walking into a room full of people who think they know you and letting them meet the version they never thought you'd become. After the NATO assignment, something shifted in me. Not because of the event, not even because of Rebecca, but because I finally stopped carrying the need to explain, to translate my life to people who were fluent only in comfort. There's a cost to being the strong one in a family. They use your silence as proof of your absence. They confuse your endurance for detachment. And then, when you don't collapse, they say you were never really there. But I was. I was the one who changed Dad's tires after he slipped a disc. I was the one who packed Rebecca's suitcase the night she panicked about her college move. I was the one who sat in the ER while Mom waited for her biopsy results, though she later told everyone it was Rebecca who comforted her. They just didn't see me. Until that moment. Until the salute. Until the word "Captain" filled the garden air and rewrote the entire narrative they'd spent years polishing. After that, the emails came in strange waves. An aunt asking how I got into the defense world her son wanted a connection. A cousin from Texas forwarding me an article about women in the military. Thought this might be your kind of read. Even my father sent a photo one afternoon. A grainy image of me in junior ROTC. Awkward. Braces. Boots too big. Captioned. We should have known back then. You always stood straightest. I didn't reply. Because they weren't talking to me. They were talking to the version of me that was now undeniable. The uniformed one. The decorated one. The woman no longer in their shadow because she'd outgrown their light. One morning, I was scheduled to speak at a leadership forum closed door. Off record. Mostly high-ranking officers and civilian analysts. I walked in early. Always do. I like the way a room sounds when it hasn't decided what it thinks of you yet. The coordinator greeted me, stiff and overpolished. We weren't sure if you'd need a podium, he said. Most of the male officers prefer it, but I won't be using one. I said. I speak standing still. No barriers. During my talk, I saw him again. Daniel. Sitting beside a senior intelligence director. He wasn't in uniform, but he looked at me like someone trying to reconcile the past with a headline. When it ended, he approached, waited until others had filtered out. "Captain Monroe," he said. Or, "I guess it's Colonel now." I smiled softly, unofficially. "Yes." He looked down. I meant what I did. That salute. I didn't know everything back then, but I saw enough to know I had to do it. I nodded. "You didn't have to." I did. For me. Then, after a pause, he asked, "Do you think she regrets it?" What she said I didn't answer right away, because that question wasn't for me. It was for him. For every person who watched silence weaponized and said nothing. Instead, I said she regrets not knowing who I am. And that's enough. He nodded. "If you ever need a favor, anything I don't. Not cruel, just honest. Because once you reclaim your name in a room that once stripped it from you, you don't bargain anymore. You just stand." That night, I returned to my apartment. Clean lines, sparse walls. I took off my medals, laid them in the drawer, the same way I always do, with care, with ceremony. And then I sat, in the quiet, the kind of quiet I used to mistake for loneliness. Now it feels like clarity. You ever sit alone and realize you're not missing anyone? That's the most powerful silence there is. The autumn rain tapped soft fingers on my window that night. Not the kind of storm that roars, but the kind that lingers. A gray hush, like the sky itself was too tired to scream. I didn't turn on the lights, just stood at the glass, watching the city blur beneath the droplets, traffic lights glowing red and gold, like metals strung through mist. I could see my own faint reflection, no makeup, hair in a low knot, the last trace of my uniform in the collar of the undershirt still clinging to my frame. That version of me used to feel like a mask. Now, it feels like skin. You ever get to a point where you no longer need to become anything, where you simply are? There was a time not so long ago when I would have rehearsed conversations in my head, imagined calling my sister, giving her the chance to explain, to rewrite what she'd said in front of our whole family. I used to think if I could just find the right words, I could bridge that canyon. But I've learned something. Sometimes the canyon is the truth, and what's waiting on the other side doesn't deserve your voice. 2 days later, my mother showed up. No call, no text, just her pale blue Buick idling outside my building at 10:46 a.m. I saw it from the 11th floor window of my office, the kind of thing you don't think twice about until your heart recognizes a ghost before your brain can name it. There she was, hair pinned back, gloves on, though it was hardly cold. She stood by the intercom, staring up like the building might open its mouth and speak to her. My assistant knocked on the door. "Captain Monroe, Colonel, there's someone here. Says she's your mother." "I know. Should I?" I shook my head. "I'll go." I met her in the lobby. She turned when the elevator opened and said my name like it tasted foreign. "Elise." "Mom." A silence bloomed between us. Heavy. Familiar. She looked me up and down, noticing the uniform, though she didn't comment on it, noticing the office badge, the building ID, the access level color stripe, all the little clues that said this isn't your daughter's world anymore. "I didn't come to argue," she said, "or apologize, if that's what you think." I nodded. "Didn't expect you to." She blinked. Surprised, maybe, that I didn't flinch. "I came to understand," she said. "Rebecca's not herself these days. She hasn't been the same since the wedding." I tilted my head slightly. "And what does that have to do with me?" Another pause. Then she's embarrassed. I cross my arms. She should be, I said. That landed. I saw it. My mother adjusted her purse strap like it gave her something to do. You've always been difficult, hard to reach, even as a girl. You mean independent? She flinched. You see, that's the thing about women like her. Women raised in an era where politeness was armor and silence was survival. They don't know what to do with daughters who sharpen instead of soften, who lead instead of follow. She looked away. Your father thinks you've changed. I have. Not always for the better. There it was. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. Do you think power makes a woman worse? I asked. Or just harder to ignore? She didn't answer. Didn't need to. I stepped closer. You came here to fix something, but I'm not broken. Mom, I'm not wounded or waiting. I'm not bitter. I'm just finished with the performance. She looked at me like she was seeing someone else. Maybe for the first time. You're cold, she whispered. No, I said gently. I'm not cold, I'm clear. And for the first time in our history, she had no comeback. She left not long after that. No hug, no tears. Just the sound of her heels against tile, fading like memory. I didn't watch her drive away. Because some people exit your life like they were never supposed to have keys to begin with. That night, I returned to my apartment and laid my uniform across the chair. I brushed the sleeves smooth, straightened the insignia. I don't hang it in the closet. Not because I need to see it every day, but because it's not a relic. It's my skin when the world forgets what I am. There's a knock at my door. I freeze. It's late. I rarely get visitors. When I open it, Rebecca is standing there, drenched. No umbrella. Hair stuck to her cheeks. Mascara trailing down like she's trying to wear guilt as decoration. She opens her mouth, closes it, tries again. Elise, she says. It's the first time she's said my name without sarcasm since we were 17. I let her in, not because I want to, but because I need to know. She stands in the entryway like a child. I was wrong, she says. Just like that. No prelude, no apology draped in excuses. I say nothing. She tries again. I don't know who you are anymore, and it scares me. Good. It should. You stood there, she continues, and you didn't yell. You didn't make a scene. You didn't try to take back the room, and everyone respected you more than they ever did me. Still, I remain silent, because her guilt isn't an invitation, it's an echo. She wipes her face. Daniel talks about you all the time. My friends, our guests still bring it up. The way he saluted. They say it was the most powerful moment they've seen at a wedding. It wasn't about the wedding, I say quietly. It was about history catching up. She nods, looks down. You hate me, she says. No, I answer. I just stopped needing you. And that. She can't argue. She doesn't stay long. She leaves the apology in the air, half spoken, half swallowed, and I let it hang there. Because not every story needs a reconciliation. Some just need a reckoning. The next morning, I iron my uniform again, pin my commendation in place. I walk into the Pentagon at 07:00 sharp, where a room of men rise when I enter. I brief the Joint Task Force on intelligence only I know how to decipher. I sign off on clearance that shapes borders. And later, when I walk past the Hall of Honor, I see a cadet stop mid-step. She's maybe 20, eyes wide, holding a binder close to her chest like armor. You're her, she says. The one from the wedding. I smile, soft and unshaken. I'm Elise Monroe. Her face lights up. Thank you, she whispers. For everything. She doesn't know the whole story. She doesn't need to. Because she knows enough to stand straighter, to walk braver, to speak louder. And I I walk on, not to prove anything, not to reclaim a seat at their table, but because I've built my own, and it stands taller than any ceremony they left me off of. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if they had included me, if my name had been on the guest list from the start, if my sister had smiled instead of smirked, if I'd been seated between my uncles and my mother, sipping champagne, clapping politely as Rebecca kissed the groom and tossed the bouquet. Would I have stayed quiet? Would I have swallowed myself again, like I had 100 times before, smiled through clenched teeth and told myself that maybe, this time, it wasn't worth disrupting the peace? But that's the thing about peace. It's not real when it comes at the cost of erasure. You've felt that before, haven't you? That weight in your chest when someone hugs you with one arm and excludes you with the other, when your success is only acknowledged in whispers, while your failures are printed in bold. The day of the wedding could have been simple. I could have nodded, clapped, left early. But instead, it became the beginning of something irreversible. It became the day the silence cracked. The day they saw me. Not the version I had trained myself to be in their presence, apologetic. Smaller, always folding myself into whatever space was left. But the real one. The woman who had already survived what they could never name. The salute from Daniel was not a mistake. It was a correction. A correction not just of protocol, but of perspective. He saw me, and once he did, everyone else had to. 3 months later, I received a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs, not a usual formality but a personal invitation to speak at the upcoming National Women in Service Forum. They wanted me to open the event. I stared at the letter for a long time, fingers hovering over the signature. They'd asked for me by name, not by connection, not by favor. Colonel Elise Monroe, not Rebecca's sister, not the difficult one, not the woman with no +1. The real me. I accepted. The venue was large, all glass walls and polished wood. The kind of place where microphones catch every breath and nerves feel like echoes. But when I stood behind the podium that morning, I wasn't nervous. Not anymore. The room held over 500 women officers, analysts, veterans, cadets. They watched me with the kind of focus I had spent a lifetime chasing from my own family. I cleared my throat, adjusted the collar of my uniform, and said, "There's a specific kind of invisibility women in service know. It's not the kind that comes from silence. It's the kind that comes from being too visible in the wrong way, reduced to symbols, assumptions, or stereotypes." Heads nodded, some furrowed brows. One woman closed her eyes, as if remembering something. I was left off a wedding list. I said, not because of conflict, but because of comfort, because it was easier to pretend I didn't belong than to reconcile who I'd become. I saw tears in the third row, but I showed up anyway. I continued, because some rooms need to be confronted with the truth, not loudly, not violently, but unmistakably. There was a pause. You know the kind when everyone leans in, not because you raised your voice, but because you didn't need to. I wore my uniform. I didn't say a word. And when the groom saluted, something broke open. Silence. Then applause. Long, steady. Not frantic, but earned. Afterward, one of the cadets approached me. She looked barely 20, her hands shaking as she clutched a notebook. "Colonel Monroe," she said, "you're the reason I stayed in the program." I smiled. "What do you mean?" "My father said the army would turn me into a man. My mother said it would make me unmarriageable, but I saw the clip of you from the wedding, and I thought if she can stand in that space, with that calm, maybe I don't have to choose between power and peace." I didn't have an answer for her. Just a nod. Just the quiet knowledge that maybe, sometimes, the wound becomes the weapon. or maybe not a weapon, just light. The week after the forum, Rebecca sent me a video. No caption, just the file. I hesitated before playing it. It was a home movie. Us, ages 7 and 10, backyard tent made of old sheets. Rebecca pretending to be the bride, and me pretending to be the general officiating her wedding with a flashlight as a microphone. I'd forgotten that moment. She hadn't. At the end of the clip, the young version of her says, giggling, "I want you at my wedding no matter what." Then the tape ended. No message, but I understood. A kind of apology. Not in words, but in memory. I didn't respond. Not out of pride, but because forgiveness doesn't always come with contact. Sometimes it comes quietly in the privacy of our own reflections. She had to watch that old tape and sit with who we once were. That's enough for me. My father never called, but I received a Christmas card that year with only 2 words handwritten inside, "Proud, Dad." It wasn't redemption, but it was something. And I didn't throw it away. It sits in a drawer next to the commendations, the ribbons, the invitation from the Department of Defense Gala where I'll be speaking next spring. Each one a note in the anthem they once tried to silence. The last time I visited Arlington, I stood among the rows of white stones and thought about legacy. How some people carve theirs in monuments, and some carve it by walking into a garden in full uniform and saying nothing at all. I never asked for a stage, but when one appears, I don't blink. Because I've stood in the shadows long enough to know what light costs. And I've paid it. In silence, in restraint, in the slow reclaiming of a name that was always mine. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't check who's watching. I don't count the eyes. I just walk, because the ones who matter already know. And the ones who don't, they're not on my list. Spring came in slow, deliberate breaths that year, not in the rush of petals or the fanfare of holidays, but in the quiet return of green at the edges of everything. Even the city felt softer, the sirens less sharp, the sidewalks less cracked, as if the world itself was unclenching. I used to dread spring. It reminded me too much of fresh starts I was never invited to. But this time, it felt different. I had stopped waiting for invitations. You know that moment when your peace no longer feels borrowed, but built? When you look around and realize you crafted this stillness with discipline, with grief, with decisions nobody clapped for. That was me now. I spent my mornings earlier than I used to, before the phones rang, before meetings began. There's something about watching the sun rise from a military base that rewrites your entire concept of time. You see how slow power moves, how steady it must be. Not loud, not flashy, just unshakable. One morning, I was sitting in the officers' mess when my old commanding officer approached. Colonel Roth, a man whose silence used to terrify rookies. He looked like he'd been carved out of granite and resentment. But he always treated me with a stern, almost reluctant respect. He set down his tray across from mine and leaned in. "Heard you're speaking at the gala," he said. I nodded. He picked up his coffee, sipped, then looked at me not with intimidation, but with something bordering on admiration. "You've come far," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You doubted I would." He snorted. "Didn't doubt it. Just knew the road would be hell. Especially with your last name." There it was. The quiet truth we never said aloud. Monroe was known, but not for the right reasons, not for legacy or service, just for mediocrity. For women who hosted book clubs and worried more about table settings than treaties. No one expected Elise Monroe to hold the clearance I did. To stand beside generals and not flinch. "You've redefined it," he said after a moment. The name, that stayed with me. Not because I needed his approval, but because I realized I no longer needed to escape my name. I had made it mean something else. The gala was held in the grand rotunda, vaulted ceilings, a room designed for echoes and gravitas. I'd walked its marble halls before, years ago, shadowing someone else, standing behind another officer's shoulder, holding reports and waiting for my moment. This time, they were waiting for me. When I stepped onto the stage, there was a hush. Not because I was famous, not because I was feared, but because the room recognized something solid. I wore my formal uniform, every button polished, every medal aligned. I didn't need to be approachable tonight. I needed to be undeniable. "Good evening," I began. When I was a child, I once asked my father what makes someone worthy of being remembered. He said, "It depends who's doing the remembering." The audience leaned in. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Because for years, I shaped myself to be remembered by the wrong people. By family who didn't see me, by a sister who called my service a phase, by a society that calls men commanding and women difficult. A pause. Let it land. Let it breathe. But then, something happened. I stopped asking to be remembered, and I started insisting on being known. Applause didn't come immediately. It came slowly, like truth stirring the air. After the speech, a 4-star general approached me. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me like I was part of a shift he'd been waiting his whole life to see. "You remind me of someone," he said. "A woman I served with in 1984. Smartest in the room, always 10 steps ahead, but they never let her wear her rank out loud." I nodded. "We wear it now." He smiled. "Damn right you do." Later that night, I stood by the exit as guests filtered out a habit I'd picked up in operations, making sure the exits were clear, the routes known. That's when I saw her, Rebecca, alone. She wasn't dressed to be seen. No designer heels, no statement necklace, just a navy coat and quiet shoes. Our eyes met. She didn't approach. She didn't wave. But she didn't look away either. And in that pause, that breathless, wordless pause, something passed between us. Recognition, not forgiveness, not affection, just the truth. We were no longer orbiting the same sun. She turned first, walking into the marble shadows of the hallway, and I let her go, because I wasn't there to be seen by her. I was there to stand. You understand that difference, don't you? Later that week, I returned to Annapolis, not for ceremony, not for duty, just to walk the grounds again. There's a bench near the South Quad, beneath a weeping cherry tree. I used to sit there during training, watching the blossoms fall like parachutes. Back then, I used to imagine my family sitting in the stands one day, watching me graduate, cheering louder than anyone. They didn't come. They said they had Rebecca's college showcase that week, that she was the star of the season. I sat on that same bench now, years later, and watched new cadets jog by, sweat on their foreheads, determination in their spines. One of them tripped and got back up without looking around. That's what matters. Not who claps, but who continues. I closed my eyes and let the sun find my face. There are wounds I no longer carry, because I've earned something heavier and holier, myself. The truth is, I don't hate them. Not even Rebecca, because if they had loved me properly, I might never have become this woman. I might have stayed small, obedient, waiting, but instead, they gave me the best gift they never meant to: exile. And from exile, I built a kingdom. So when they speak my name now, it echoes. Not in their dining room, but in war rooms, in archives, in ceremonies where strangers rise at my entrance, because I was never on their list, but I was on history's, and I made damn sure it spelled my name right. They say your final moment of transformation doesn't come in triumph, but in stillness. Not the applause, not the speech, not the revenge. It comes later, when no one is watching. When the noise dies down and you are left alone with your own reflection. That's when you know you no longer need them to understand you. You've outgrown the translation. It happened for me on a quiet Sunday. No ceremony, no press. Just an ordinary morning where the sunlight poured across the floor of my apartment, golden and soft, catching the edge of my metal case as I swept past it with a cup of coffee. I stopped, looked, noticed something I hadn't before. They didn't gleam, they glowed, not with pride, but with peace. Do you know what that feels like to finally stop fighting for recognition and start living in your own alignment? The day the defense secretary called me personally, I was mid-flight, touching down from a humanitarian oversight mission in Eastern Europe. Nothing dramatic. Just oversight on field logistics, safety routes, triage protocols, quiet power, the kind of work no one writes novels about but everyone relies on. When I turned on my phone, the screen blinked with a missed call and a message. Colonel Monroe, I'd appreciate your presence at the Memorial Honors Reception next week. I'll be addressing the nation. I'd like you standing behind me. I read it twice. It wasn't a request, and it wasn't about publicity. It was about symbolism. He wanted me visible, so I went. Black blazer, bare medals. No need for full regalia, just enough to say I'm here, and I belong. I stood in the second row behind the podium, just to the left of a retired major general and a female diplomat from the Baltic states. My hands were clasped, my chin raised, my face unreadable, and when the Secretary of Defense said my name mid-speech when he spoke it slowly, reverently. As an example of silent courage, the cameras shifted. For a flicker of a second, the entire country saw me, and that includes them. My father, my mother, Rebecca, and everyone who ever removed me from a list because I didn't fit their definition of a woman worth inviting. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like air, like release. Later, I learned the photo went viral, not for scandal, but for stillness. A journalist wrote, while others stood tall. Monroe stood still, and that made her unforgettable. That's when Rebecca finally called. The real call. Not a text, not a clip, a voice. She didn't lead with an apology. She led with a breath. Elise, she said. I watched the speech. I waited. I didn't understand back then. When you showed up at the wedding, when you didn't say a word, I thought you were trying to ruin the moment. I wasn't. I said, I was reclaiming mine. She sniffled. I could hear her pacing. A hallway. Hardwood floors. You were always better at leaving, she whispered. No, I replied gently. I was just better at surviving. A pause. I think about that day a lot, she admitted. Not just what I said, but what you didn't. You didn't fight back. You didn't defend yourself. I didn't need to. That scares me, she said. The way you can just rise without asking. Maybe it should. I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because the truth matters. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I said yes. Not because I needed closure, but because I'd already closed the chapter and was willing to let her read it anyway. We met at a quiet cafe near the Naval Archives, a place lined with dark wood and brass fixtures, where silence is respected and conversations take their time. She arrived in a simple coat. No entourage, no pretense. I came in uniform, not for effect, but for honesty. She stood when I entered, for the first time in our lives. My sister stood up for me. We sat, ordered nothing for 15 minutes, just looked. She studied my face like she was seeing it without the veil of competition or childhood narratives. "I used to hate how calm you were," she said. "It made me feel loud." "You weren't loud," I replied. "You were just always trying to be heard." She blinked. Something in her softened. "I didn't know how to share the room with someone who didn't need it," she said. "I needed the spotlight." "You didn't." "I needed the shadows," I corrected. "Back then, they were safer." A silence passed. Then, slowly, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded card. "I wrote this the day after the wedding," she said. "I never sent it. I took it, didn't open it, just nodded. That day," she whispered, "when Daniel saluted you, I didn't recognize his face. It wasn't admiration. It was awe. I'd never seen anyone look at me like that. And he was looking at you. He saw what I earned," I said, "not what I was given." We sat for another hour. There were no declarations, no apologies etched in gold. Just two women finally learning how to see each other across years of noise and silence. When we stood to leave, she touched my arm. "I don't expect us to be sisters again," she said. "We never stopped." I answered, "We just forgot what it could mean." She smiled. I watched her walk away, shoulders looser than I remembered. Maybe that's the most we get. Not a healed story, but a better ending. That night, I walked alone along the Potomac. The city glowed behind me. I could hear my boots echo along the stone path. Steady, measured, sure. And I thought about every woman who's been called too much, too quiet, too strange, too cold. Every woman who's been erased, then blamed for disappearing. You, me, all of us. And I made a silent promise beneath the moonlight I will never wait for them to name me again. I will walk into every room like my presence was always assumed, because I was not born for their comfort. I was born for clarity and the truth. The truth doesn't need a spotlight. It wears a uniform and walks forward, even when the world pretends not to see. But now they do. And now, they rise. I didn't need them to respect me. The whole room already did.